Hi again. Before I start this time, I actually wanted to mention Emilio Longo. Is an Australian gentleman, artist, teacher, and he has been taking the time to interview all the first generation Gamble students. That's at least attempting to do that. And I told him I would put up his information, and I do suggest you go look if you actually want to listen to me. I mean, I haven't helped you, but for 6 straight hours of interview, go to it's called Skill-Based Art, a learning resource for art students and artist teachers. And you'll see this up on the screen at some point, if not now. So Skill-Based Art, a learning resource for art students and artist teachers. All right. And I do want right now publicly to thank Emilio for taking the time to do this. It's really a significant thing in the times we live in. And I think some of the reasons will come out as we speak on the subjects, especially, I mean, today's and some other ones, as people begin to realize the difference between the way the Gamble brought down, that is to say, became a vehicle for the information of the past. So much of today's painting is based on the world of illustration, the art colleges and their illustration departments, and there's so much significant difference there, both in motive and in general. I don't know if I want to say the word ethic, but at least aesthetic. The information is useful. It's also useful to look at the work that you see coming out of the Gamble world. I've said in the past that one of us, Richard Lack, at times looks like he came out of an art school background, and I'm not picking on him or anything. I'm not. And we all are from this generation, or these last couple generations, where you had to find it wherever you could find it. But his association with Gamble definitely put him in a different place, and to begin to be aware of what that might mean in conversation and in looking at pictures is kind of a significant deal. One other thing I'd like to say, and that is that everything I say about painters and about painting is a visual discussion. It's a discussion of what I see, not of things I've heard. Okay, now it's either, or I should put it differently. It's either what I see or know based on work and based on what I do, and based on. So when I say what I see, I mean what I see in a person's work is what I'm looking at, not some guy and that he's got this or got that. I'm saying what I see in a person's work is what I'm analyzing. My whole book on the Boston School, which will be out one of these days, is just an artist's look at the Boston School and the Boston School methods, and someone who's acquired a bunch of them in myself. So, but that's my point of departure. I just look at pictures and I look, with a trained eye. So that's your analysis. That's to whatever degree you get benefit. That's what the benefit would be. I'm not particularly doing very particularly well this morning verbally, but I think that's clear enough at this point. So here's the question from Daniel for this week. As I watch your video, I've been reading Richard Schmid's book, Alla Prima 2. Some of his concepts and practices seem to be somewhat aligned with yours and those of the Boston School. In particular, his sections on the impressionist block-in and the full-color block-in seem to align with your painting practice and the concept of visual order. Would you care to comment on this if you're familiar with his painting and writings? Let me start right from the beginning and say I'm not, I've never associated with Richard Schmid. He's been out in New England, I think in Vermont, and a number of my friends, and possibly even a student or two, have hung out in that community setting that they've created, if it's still here. But I've never done that ever, and probably the reason is because I'm not interested in the kind of work he does. And when I say that, it seems funny, but when I mentioned earlier the idea of what happens in the world of illustration and versus what happens in Gamel's long historical context, I see such a huge difference, and I've never actually been interested in the stuff that goes on in illustration. And so I'd be hard-pressed to analyze much of his method. One of the things that surprises me with all of the new guys is the tininess of brushes and the way they hold the brush way up at the end, as opposed to down at the end of the brush. You hold it right up at the bristles. Those kinds of things are curious to me, in the very least. But and undoubtedly painters through history have done also whatever they feel like, whatever is useful to them. But I know that in the Boston School training, there's a reason for the long brush, and it's partially because you want to have yourself way back from the painting, in significant part. But the tiny bristle too. I mean, when you're talking about Sargent's conversation, I mean, he says use the biggest brush you can in the start, and I don't see much of any of that. I see a lot of, and this is by way now of beginning to be a comparison between what the Boston School thinking is like. And I'll try to put up a start for you so you can actually make a comparison yourself. I think I can probably take a picture of a page in that video that I was able to watch online of Schmid doing a painting from life outdoors, and show you a start by a Boston School painter next to it, and I think you'll see some significant difference. But largely, it's in the fineness of the articulation at the beginning that, as I said, with little tiny brushes, and the Boston School is all about great masses, great relationships, big, and the thing as a whole. And so, yeah, definitely bigger brushes, limited articulation, but limited to places of great importance. Distributed around the page. Those are the kinds of things that are just wildly different from what anybody does that I've seen out there so far in the modern generation of representational painters. As I said, most of them appear to be coming from a very different background, and my temptation was, if I couldn't find the education anywhere else, the nearest thing to a good fine arts education would have been the illustration department at any one of the art schools. I know that a couple of guys in New York that I admired were, when I was young, were out of Tyler. I think one of them was from Parsons. Yeah, so I'm trying to think there. I think that's the main. I think it was Schickler and a number of those guys right around him who were Tyler, but. My information is old and not probably even, who knows how accurate that is. But what I'm saying is that it was clear that there were art schools, and they were in the illustration department. Is the way I read it, is what I believe I've read. So, but the general discussion about the impressionist, using the word impressionist and Blockin at the same time. The Boston School guys were slightly more oriented around spots. I mean, if you look at the Metcalf's work, Willard Metcalf, Painting Outdoors, you'll see an impressionist painter with that Boston School kind of approach, a Monet informed approach. And he's absolutely, even by the way, he's using smaller brushes too, but not tiny, and they're fully filled with color from the beginning, very much in the Monet way. And again, that's another one of those things that I'm seeing in the Schmid world and stuff, where there's a lot of messing around with indirect messing around with, so that there's no color, or the color is very minimized in terms of its simple truth. And it doesn't appear to be, there appears to be no effort actually to put a note down and then put another note down and let them talk as a pure color pursuit, which is very typical of an impressionist of any kind post Monet for sure, and definitely the Boston School. But I was going to say about Metcalf, if you look at his work, his articulation, is remarkable, but more than anything else, his color is true and full of light and life. Whereas most of what I see today, and I would argue that it's true of Schmid, is that it's on some sort of an edge of the formulaic. And again, I'm telling you what I see with my eyes. So if you want an actual comparison, I have no. By the way, I've always liked Schmid's work. So don't let anybody think that I'm not that I'm picking on him out of any kind of other reason. It's a fair question, and I think any analysis of me is as fair as that too. Yeah. But with that question of what they call the impressionist block-in, you're probably referring to what was going on around Hawthorne and Henchy, where they did these, I think they call them mud faces or something like that. The idea, that is so significantly different from both Monet and the Boston approach that I hardly know what to say about it. So, if you say impressionism in general, I'm not so sure what that means because there is no in general. So, well, I think the best thing I should say is really that the forthcoming book, which I'm hoping will be out within the 6 months, will make that really clear on multiple levels. So I guess there's one last thing, and that is the question of what we're doing visually as impressionists or as anybody else. I've long departed from the idea that pictures are about things, that a picture is subject, and I'm saying meaning really truly the illustrator's world. I live in a world aesthetically, which is about color relations and the beauty that they make, about shape and shape distribution and the play of those things in relation to each other as the predominant conversation of painting, and not the drawing of people and not the illustration of stories. So I would suggest to you that I believe that actually is the culmination of the effort to be a real impressionist. And I don't mean an impressionist. I mean the Gamel, small I impressionist, a person who really is trying to make it who winds up finding that beauty can only be acquired, that the truth in front of you can only be acquired via the beauty of the relationships of things. And then before you know it, you're in a place where you simply have to describe what you're doing as more or less correlating with actually making music or a form of visual poetry, but definitely not the idea behind or the sort of the snazzy mark making that helps people want to buy your work, which is significantly different. I think there's one thing that the Schmid conversation brings up, and that is there was a conversation about a Zen painter. He's painting the Buddha or something, they said, and what happened as he painted, people would notice that he seemed to be sort of getting more vague. The artist himself was he seemed to be more solid each time they saw it. He'd be less solid each time they saw him as the painting grew more like. And they said one day they came in and they saw the Buddha and there was no artist. The artist had disappeared. And there's a model like that is just not in the world today. The world today is saying, how can I separate myself and make people look at me? And where the old model was you're a servant of the arts. And first of all, what in the heck is the nature of this thing that has you? And the second thing is can you get out of the way? Or is it about you? And I think one of the Sargent sets a tone for the modern era that I think is frankly tragic, and it's and that is like he's always making a statement. He's always you see more Sargent than you do love of truth. You know what I mean? And it reminds me of Rubens and certain others. Every painter has his identity, by the way. It's not like you're trying to escape it, but the idea of somehow creating a monument to yourself or it's kind of strange, in the long history. And I think that's what the pursuit of style is. And I'm not going to tell you I'm right about this. That's my sense of it. And so I probably will always be that guy who says, what is that? What is that person is doing? Is that the pursuit of beauty in the midst of truth, or is that me making a name for myself? And I think that's the challenge. I think that's the challenge of the times that we live in. So thank you very much. I apologize to Richard if he finds this offensive, but in the meantime, thank you very much for the question, Daniel, and we'll see you next time. Oh, I'm sorry. If I got to tell you to share, please, would you share, comment, subscribe, and whatever the last one was, like. Okay, it does help a great deal. By the way, I'm going to say this because my producer would like me to stop, but I'm going to say this, that the only reason I'm doing this, I've sort of committed myself to never marketing, and my student body has stayed as it was. Full. My studio's been full for the entire time of my teaching career that way. And yet, I find myself making the same mistake that Gamel did, and that is that the ideas that I value, not having a kind of promotion, a platform in the public mind, means a massive delay in this conversation and potentially damage culturally. So if I'm right about the things I'm telling you, I really kind of I begin to realize I have an obligation to actually market. And frankly, of course, I hate losing students to people that I don't admire as much as the knowledge that I have to offer. So not Richard Schmid in this case. But thank you all very much. See you next time.